For 38 years, Judge Lorraine Holt had walked into that courtroom, like she owned the air inside it. And in many ways, she did. People in Clarksville, Tennessee didn't talk about the weather or the football scores the way they talked about Lorraine Holt. They talked about her the way people talk about a landmark, the old water tower, the bridge that had survived 3 floods, the judge who had never once cried on the bench. She was as fixed and unyielding as anything in that county. She had put away killers without blinking. She had terminated parental rights without a tremor in her voice. She had looked fathers in the eye and told them they would never see their children again. And she had gone home that same evening, eaten dinner alone, and slept without dreams. People called her the Stone Judge. She had heard it. She didn't mind. Her office on the 3rd floor of the Cumberland County Courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon polish. She arrived every morning at 7:45 minutes before anyone else. She left every evening after 6, long after the clerks had gone. In the 22 years since her husband Raymond had died of a heart attack at 51, Lorraine had let the work consume her the way a fire consumes a log, completely steadily until there was nothing left but heat. She had no children of her own. She had 2 sisters she called on birthdays, and a colleague she had lunch with every other Thursday. She had a house on Orchard Hill with 4 bedrooms she never entered, and a garden Raymond had planted that she paid a man named Luis to maintain, so she didn't have to look at it and think about all the things that had never grown. She had built a life that required nothing from her except precision, and precision she had in abundance. What she did not have, and what she had stopped looking for sometime around the year Raymond died, was any desire to feel. That changed on a Tuesday in October because of a man named Declan Webb, a broken vending machine, and a little boy who couldn't stop coughing. The courthouse vending machine on the ground floor had been broken for 11 days. Lorraine knew this because she tracked small malfunctions the way she tracked everything. Methodically, with notes. She had submitted a maintenance request. She had followed up twice. This was the kind of thing that ate at her. Not because she particularly needed a bag of pretzels at 2 in the afternoon, but because a broken thing that remained broken was evidence of systems failing, and failed systems made her restless. On that Tuesday she came down from her office at 2:15 to check whether the repair had finally been made. It had not. The machine stood in the corner of the ground floor lobby, with an out-of-order sign taped crookedly across its front, and next to it, sitting on the tile floor with his back against the wall, was a man she didn't recognize. He looked to be in his mid-30s. Dark circles under his eyes, a collared shirt that had been ironed, but had lost the battle with the day. His work badge identified him as courthouse maintenance, and in his lap was a sleeping child who couldn't have been older than 4, wrapped in a denim jacket that was clearly the man's own, because his arms were bare and he was sitting in the cold air-conditioned lobby without complaining about it. Lorraine stopped walking. She had seen thousands of people in that building. She processed them the way a sorting machine processes envelopes. Quickly, categorically, without sentiment. But something about this particular image arrested her in a way she couldn't immediately explain. Maybe it was the jacket. Maybe it was the way the man held the child with both arms, even though he was scrolling through something on his phone, and could have easily shifted to one. He was doing 2 things at once, but only one of them was automatic. She must have stood there a moment too long, because the man looked up. "Sorry," he said immediately, starting to shift. "I can move, I know the lobby." "You're not in my way," Lorraine said. He relaxed slightly. "He had a bad night. I didn't want to leave him in the car." The boy stirred but didn't wake. He made a small sound in his sleep, something between a sigh and a cough, and the man rubbed his back in one slow circle without looking down, without thinking about it. "Is he sick?" Lorraine asked. It was not a question she would normally have asked. She recognized that even as she said it. The man nodded. "Asthma. And this week a respiratory infection on top of it. The doctor says he's okay, just needs rest." He glanced down at his son and then back at her, and she noticed he said the words the doctor says like a man who needed to believe them. "His name's Benji." "How old?" "Just turned 4 in August." Lorraine looked at Benji. His chapped lips, the shadows under eyes that were too small to carry shadows, the way his little fingers had curled around the collar of his father's shirt even in sleep, holding on. "Your wife couldn't stay home with him today?" she asked. The man was quiet for a moment. "No wife," he said simply. "No bitterness. Just the plain fact of it." Lorraine nodded. She turned and walked back to the elevator. She didn't know why she had stopped. She didn't know why she felt, climbing back to the 3rd floor, like she had just seen something she wasn't supposed to see. She asked her clerk Georgette about the maintenance worker the next morning. "Declan Webb," Georgette said, without needing to look anything up. Georgette knew everyone. He's been here about 2 years, real quiet, does good work. Has a little boy. I think his wife left when the boy was a baby. He brings the kid in sometimes when he can't get coverage. He brings the child to the courthouse. Just to the lobby. He keeps him out of the way. Nobody's ever really said anything. Georgette paused. Should someone say something? No, Lorraine said, and went back into her office. She sat at her desk for a moment before opening the first file of the day. Through her window she could see a wedge of the parking lot, the edge of the cedar tree the city had planted 3 years ago. The gray October sky above the roofline of the building across the street. She thought about the way Declan had rubbed his son's back without looking. Like it was breathing. Like it was just what his hand did. She opened the file, she worked. But that evening, for the first time in years, she didn't go straight to her car. She walked past the lobby vending machine, which was still broken, and she stood for a moment in the empty lobby after everyone had gone, and she thought. About what? She couldn't have said precisely. And then she went home. She stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes without turning on the light. The following week she saw him again. He was replacing a fluorescent bulb in the third-floor hallway working from a stepladder, and Benji was sitting at the base of the ladder on a folded blanket, coloring in a book with broken crayons. The boy was completely focused. His tongue stuck out slightly between his teeth. He was drawing something that might have been a house, or a rocket, or something that existed in a category only he understood. Lorraine slowed without meaning to. Declan noticed her and nodded respectfully from the ladder. Morning, Your Honor. She stopped. Good morning. Benji looked up. He had his father's eyes, dark and serious, though on a 4-year-old they were serious in a way that was almost comic, the gravity of a person who had opinions about crayons. I'm coloring, he told her, as though she might have missed it. I can see that, she said. Do you want a crayon, Benji? Declan started, but Lorraine raised a hand. What color? She asked the boy. Benji held up a yellow one with great deliberateness. This one is good for judges, he said. Lorraine looked at him. Why yellow? Because yellow is important. She took the crayon. She held it for a moment, then she handed it back. Keep it, you'll need it. She walked to her office. She sat down at her desk. She turned the thought over in her mind for a long time before she could identify what it was. And when she finally did, it was this. She had not spoken to a child voluntarily in longer than she could remember. And she had liked it. She began noticing things she had previously made invisible. The way Declan arrived earlier than his shift required, always. The way he ate lunch in 15 minutes, and spent the rest of the break on the phone. She had seen him once, outside the building, talking quietly with one hand, pressed to his forehead the way people do when they're trying to stay calm and the conversation won't let them. The way his boots were clean even though his job involved crawling into utility spaces and hauling equipment. Small dignities. She recognized them as the habits of a person trying to hold something together. She had her clerk run a quiet inquiry. Nothing official, just cross-referencing what was public. What she found was straightforward and devastating in the way that most real hardship is. Not dramatic, just relentless. Declan Webb, 36 years old, single father. His son Benjamin, called Benji, had been diagnosed with severe asthma at 14 months and had spent 3 separate weeks in the hospital in the past 2 years. The medical bills, even with coverage, had pushed Declan into debt that he was paying down slowly. Month by month, the way you bail a boat with a cup. He was working his regular maintenance job and picking up weekend shifts at a hardware store 20 minutes outside of town. He had no family in Clarksville. His mother was in Knoxville, aging and unwell herself. He had not asked anyone for help, not the county assistance programs he likely qualified for, not his employer, not anyone. Georgette had once offered to connect him with a childcare subsidy she knew about, and he had thanked her and never followed up. Lorraine read all of this and then set it aside, and for a long time she sat with a specific and unfamiliar discomfort that she could only name as this. She had spent her career making decisions about people's lives, and she had believed, genuinely believed, that fairness was enough. That accurate judgment was the highest form of care. But fairness didn't stay up until midnight doing billing paperwork. Fairness didn't eat a 15-minute lunch so a child could have an extra crayon. She didn't know what to do with this realization. So for a while she did nothing. She let it sit inside her like a stone in still water, waiting. The moment everything changed came on a Wednesday, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Lorraine was leaving the courthouse later than usual, close to 7, after a particularly grinding day. A custody case that had ended badly, the way they sometimes did, where every option felt like a loss. And someone's child was going to suffer regardless of the ruling. She had made the right decision. She was certain of it, and she felt worse than she had felt in a long time. The building was nearly empty. The lobby lights were on their dim evening setting. She came around the corner toward the exit and stopped. Declan was sitting on the floor of the lobby again, exactly as he'd been that first afternoon. Benji was asleep against his side, wheezing faintly. And Declan was staring at nothing with the kind of expression she recognized. Not sadness exactly, but exhaustion so deep it had passed through sadness, and come out somewhere quieter and more frightening. On his phone screen, visible from where she stood, was a voicemail notification from Clarksville Children's Medical, and underneath it a banking app showing a balance she was close enough to read. $94. He sensed her and looked up, and for a moment neither of them said anything. He didn't apologize this time. He was too tired to manage the social performance of apologizing, and she was glad. He had a bad one today, Declan said quietly. The school called. I had to bring him here while I finished my last 2 hours because I can't miss more shifts. Lorraine stood in the lobby. Somewhere outside a car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the far wall. Where do you go after this? She asked. Home. He should sleep, he'll feel better tomorrow. He said it the same way he'd said. The doctor says he's okay, like a man maintaining a structure because the structure was all he had. Does he have his medication? Yes. Have you eaten today? Declan looked at her. He seemed genuinely uncertain for a moment, like it was a question he hadn't considered. I'll get something on the way. Lorraine looked at the sleeping boy. His small chest rose and fell with a faint labor, that no 4-year-old's chest should have to know. She thought about all the children who had passed through her courtroom over the years. She had ordered their protection and their removal and their return, and she had done it all correctly, and she had gone home to a quiet house and felt nothing. Because feeling nothing was how she had kept going. She did not feel nothing right now. Come, she said. Declan blinked. Your Honor, there's a diner on Broad Street, Melinda's. They're open until 9. She said it as she would say a ruling, simply, without room for procedural objection. You can carry him. He stared at her for a long moment. She could see him calculating whether this was real or some kind of professional complication, whether accepting was wise, whether the dignity of refusing was worth more than the alternative. Then he looked down at Benji, then back at her. Okay, he said. They sat in a booth near the window. Benji woke halfway through the drive and accepted the situation, with the pragmatic flexibility of young children, who understand instinctively that adults are sometimes going to make inexplicable choices and the best response is to see if food is involved. Food was involved. He ordered chicken fingers with an authority that Lorraine found disproportionately moving. She ordered coffee. Then, because Georgette had told her once that she needed to eat dinner like a human being and not like a machine running on law and ambition, she ordered the soup. They did not talk about the courthouse at first. They talked about Benji, his preschool teacher, a woman named Miss Patricia, who Benji described as very loud in a tone of deep respect, his favorite color, orange, which was better than yellow, but yellow is still good for judges, and the fact that he was learning to tie his shoes, and it was taking longer than he felt it should. Declan talked about Benji the way people talk about the one thing that makes everything else make sense. Not sentimentally, practically. He talked about the bus schedule and the inhaler routine and the specific pillow arrangement that helped Benji breathe better at night. And in all of it, Lorraine heard something she had once known and forgotten. The sound of a person who was genuinely, completely devoted to another person. No qualification, no performance. How long have you been doing this alone? She asked. Since he was about 8 months old. He said it without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. It wasn't, she didn't leave badly. She just left. She wasn't ready. I understood that. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I just didn't have the option of not being ready. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my husband died when I was 47. She didn't know why she said it. She hadn't said it unprompted to anyone in years. Declan looked at her. I'm sorry. He was a good man, she said. I made him wait for too many things. I was always going to do them later. I was always going to feel things later, when the cases were finished and the work was done. She looked at her soup. Later never came. Declan didn't say anything. He seemed to understand that she wasn't asking for a response. She was just saying it out loud in a diner on a Wednesday night because it was true. And she had carried it alone for 22 years, and perhaps it was time to set it somewhere, even if only temporarily. Benji had fallen back asleep against the window. His breath had evened out. The warmth and the food had helped. He's going to be okay, Lorraine said quietly. She was looking at the boy when she said it, and she meant it differently than she had ever meant the purely legal assurances she made in courtrooms. She meant it as a choice, as intention. Declan nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, he is. What followed was not sudden. That was the part no one would have expected from the outside. That the thing which changed Lorraine Holt did not happen all at once, but slowly. The way a room warms when a door is finally left open. She started small. She reached out, through the proper county channels, to flag a child care support program that Declan had never followed up on. And she made sure the right person reached out to him directly, so he couldn't let it slip through. She said nothing to him about it. He found out through the program office and he knew, and she knew he knew, and neither of them mentioned it. She began eating lunch in the building cafeteria instead of her office. Not to seek him out. Just to be in a room with other people, which she had stopped doing so. Gradually she hadn't noticed the stopping. One afternoon in December she came downstairs and found Benji sitting alone on the lobby bench, coloring again, with a note clipped to his jacket that said, "Daddy went to get something from truck. Back in 5 minutes," with a small crayon drawing of a truck underneath. She sat beside him on the bench. He didn't look up immediately. Then, "Do you want to see my alligator?" He held up the coloring book. The alligator was purple with orange spots, and an expression that suggested it had recently made a decision it was at peace with. "It's a good alligator," she said. "His name is Frank." He turned back to coloring. Then, without looking up, "My daddy says you're very important. Your daddy is kind. He says, you helped us." Benji was very focused on Frank the alligator's tail. He said, "I should say thank you, but I'm not supposed to say why because it's between grown-ups." Lorraine was quiet for a moment. "Your daddy teaches you good things." Benji looked up at her then with total seriousness. "He says if someone is sad, you should sit next to them. You don't have to say anything. Just sit." Lorraine looked at this 4-year-old and felt something in her chest move, not break. She would not have said break, but shift. Like furniture that had been in one position so long you forget it could be moved at all. "Is that why you're sitting next to me?" she asked. Benji considered this. "You weren't sad when I sat down," he said. "But I didn't want you to get sad." He turned back to Frank. "Orange is a good color," he added, changing the subject with the efficiency of someone who had delivered his point and was ready to move on. She sat there until Declan came back from the truck, and when he found her sitting on the lobby bench beside his son, looking at a purple alligator. The expression on his face was not surprise exactly. It was something closer to relief. She told Georgette, in February, that she was considering taking a Friday afternoon off for the first time since Raymond died. Georgette looked at her for a long moment and then said, "I'll block your calendar." In the tone of someone who has been waiting years to say that. She went, on that Friday afternoon, to Benji's school performance, a Valentine's Day show in the preschool gymnasium, which smelled like construction paper and juice boxes, and 32 children experiencing strong feelings about cardboard hearts. She sat in the back. She watched Benji stand on the low riser in a red sweater and sing a song about friendship with the focused sincerity of someone who meant every word, even the ones he'd clearly only learned that week. Declan sat 2 rows ahead of her. He was recording it on his phone, which was propped badly on his knee, and he was mouthing the words along with his son, because he had heard the song enough times at home that he knew them. He was grinning in a way that Lorraine had not seen from him before. Unguarded, wide, briefly not exhausted. She did not announce herself. She left before the juice boxes were distributed and drove back to Orchard Hill and sat in Raymond's garden in the cold February air for a long time. Louise had been maintaining it well. The rose bushes were cut back properly. In a few months there would be something there again. She hadn't thought about that in years. That in spring there would be something there again. By the time March arrived, Lorraine had done 3 things she had not done in 2 decades. She had accepted an invitation to a colleague's dinner party. She had driven to Knoxville one Sunday to visit the grave. She had not visited since the year after Raymond died. And she had written a letter, a real one, on paper, to her sister in Portland, the one she hadn't called except on birthdays, and said things she had been drafting in her head for 22 years without sending. She also called in a favor. The first she had called in for personal rather than professional reasons in longer than she could say. From an attorney she knew in the public sector, to look into a legal aid organization that needed a volunteer jurist for a monthly family mediation clinic. Pro bono, evenings only. She started in April. The first night she came home and sat at the kitchen table in the dark again. But this time it was different. This time she wasn't running from the feeling. She was just letting it land. Declan found out because Georgette told him. Georgette told everyone everything eventually. It was her primary function and her great gift. And one morning he stopped Lorraine in the hallway outside her office. Not in the deferential courthouse employee way he usually did. Just stopped. The pro bono clinic, he said. You didn't have to do that, I was overdue, she said. Still. He looked at her with the same directness Benji looked at things, which she was starting to understand was a family trait. Thank you. She held his gaze for a moment. This was also something she was relearning. How to hold someone's gaze when they were grateful, instead of moving past it efficiently. Tell Benji I said hello, she said. And that Frank the alligator was an excellent choice. Declan smiled. The real one, the unguarded one. She went into her office and opened the first file of the day. At the end of that same spring, the Cumberland County Courthouse had a small staff appreciation event. The kind of institutional gathering that Lorraine had attended exactly never. Because she had never attended events she was not required to attend. This one she attended. She stood near the table with the fruit and the sparkling cider, and she talked to people. The clerks whose names she had known but whose lives she hadn't. The court reporters. The facilities manager, who told her that yes, they had finally ordered a permanent replacement for the vending machine. It was arriving Thursday. Declan was there with Benji, who was wearing a small clip-on tie and had opinions about the fruit. He spotted Lorraine from across the room and waved with his whole arm, the way 4-year-olds wave, without calibration. She waved back. Also with her whole arm. It felt unusual and correct. Later, as the event wound down, Declan found her near the door. Benji was beside him, half asleep on his feet, tie already removed and held in one small fist. He wanted to show you something, Declan said. Benji held up a folded piece of paper with great ceremony. Lorraine took it and unfolded it. It was a drawing. 2 figures, one tall and one small, standing in front of a building that was almost certainly meant to be the courthouse. She could tell by the columns Benji had drawn, which were ovals but confident ones. The tall figure had a robe. The short figure had an alligator beside it. Underneath, in the large uneven letters of a person who was still making peace with the alphabet. For the JID from Benji and Frank. Lorraine looked at it for a long moment. It's very good, she said. And her voice was not the voice she used in courtrooms. It was something older and quieter, something she had not heard from herself in a long time. He says the judge needed a picture, Declan said softly. Because pictures make people feel less alone. She folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of her jacket, close. She drove home on Orchard Hill. She let herself in and turned the lights on. All of them, which she did not usually do. And she stood in the kitchen and made herself a real dinner for the first time in longer than she could calculate. She ate it at the table. She left the television on in the next room, not for the sound, but because it was something Raymond had always done, and she had spent 22 years turning it off. She left it on. Outside, in the garden, the rose bushes that Louise had tended through the cold were beginning, finally, and without drama, to come back. Sometimes the people who unlock us don't come with credentials or recommendations. They come with broken crayons and clip-on ties and a gravity that is serious in a way that is almost comic. They sit beside us before we are sad so that we don't get that way. And they teach us, without trying to, that a life kept perfectly ordered and perfectly alone is not a life that is perfectly fine. It is just a life that has forgotten it can be something else.